Welcome to the art class.
So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you are 18 years old.
Yeah.
You are lying flat on your back, completely immobilized in a full body cast. You can't turn your head. You can't, look out a window.
Right, you're just totally trapped.
Exactly. The only thing you can see all day, every single day, is a mirror that your mother had a carpenter install on the ceiling right above your bed.
Which is just, it's incredibly claustrophobic to even think about.
It really is. So what do you do when the only thing you have left to look at is your own broken reflection? Well, if you're Frida Kahlo, you don't paint a dreamscape, you paint a medical chart.
And that premise is inherently terrifying, right? Because you are stripped of all external distraction. Like that ceiling mirror forces this absolute inescapable confrontation with your physical reality.
Yeah.
And when you look at the source material we're dissecting for today's deep dive, this really profound argument emerges about how that confrontation manifested on canvas.
Which is what we're going to unpack today.
Right. Because the argument here is that Kahlo's famous self-portraits, they were never meant to be surrealist fantasies or, mere emotional metaphors. They were literal, meticulous autopsy and medical reports of her own failing body.
Which completely shifts the lens on how you view her entire body of work. I mean, for you listening, think of this deep dive as basically a masterclass in how we communicate our hidden internal realities to a world that, well, usually only sees the surface.
Exactly.
Because the tragedy of that ceiling mirror is that it only gave her an audience of one. Like, if her body was a medical crisis, she was the only physician on staff.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
Right. So how does she smuggle that clinical evidence out to the rest of the world? To really get that, we have to kind of pull the intake files on the trauma that made these visual records necessary in the first place.
We do. We have to start with the anatomy of the artist. So Frida Kahlo was born in 1907 in Coyoacán.
Yeah.
And her relationship with physical adversity, it really established itself long before she ever picked up a brush.
Because of the polio.
Yes. At age 6, she contracted polio. And the disease actually left her right leg permanently thinner and shorter than her left.
Right, which she spent the rest of her life masking. She adopted those really beautiful, flowing, traditional long skirts.
Yeah, the Tejana dresses.
Exactly. And she always framed that wardrobe choice as a celebration of her Mexican identity, like a deliberate cultural costume, rather than, the concealment of a lifelong physical disability.
Which shows she was already actively learning how to curate her physical reality for the outside world. She took a documented medical fact, the severe muscle atrophy from the polio, and transformed it into this striking aesthetic choice.
She took control of the narrative.
She totally did. She was taking control of the narrative of her own body. But the true inciting incident, the really catastrophic event that would necessitate the medical records we are looking at today, that happened on a September afternoon in Mexico City when she was just 18.
Right. She was simply riding a crowded wooden bus when a metal streetcar slammed into it.
Yeah.
And the collision was just utterly devastating.
The clinical inventory of her injuries from that afternoon is, well, it's staggering. And these are documented hospital records.
Yeah.
Not later artistic embellishments.
Right. This is the literal medical chart.
Exactly. So during the crash, an iron handrail actually tore loose from the streetcar and pierced her body like a sword.
Oh, God.
I know. It entered at her left hip and exited out the other side.
Wow.
And the damage didn't stop there. Her spine was broken in 3 different places.
3 places?
Yeah. Her collarbone was snapped. Her pelvis was cracked in 3 separate places. Her right leg, which remember is the leg already severely weakened by polio, that was fractured in 11 places.
11 places. That is just, surviving that kind of catastrophic polytrauma in the 1920s defies logic.
It really does. Her right foot was completely crushed too.
The sheer volume of mechanical damage to her skeletal structure is horrifying. But the way she framed the event later in life, it tells you everything you need to know about her psychological resilience.
Oh, her sense of humor about it?
Yes. She later noted, using this incredibly dark, biting humor, that she, quote, lost her virginity to a metal handrail.
Which is just so incredibly dark. But that humor is a survival mechanism, It reveals her absolute refusal to let the trauma remain unspeakable. She stared directly into the horror of it.
It's kind of like it's like a reverse panopticon.
Oh, how so?
Well, instead of a warden in a central tower watching 100 prisoners, keeping them in line through constant observation from an outside authority, you have one prisoner forced to be her own warden.
Oh, because she's confined to the bed.
Right. Confined to that bed in a full-body cast, staring up at that ceiling mirror, she is endlessly policing her own shattered reflection. She is literally the sole witness to her own destruction.
That is a really powerful way to frame it. And that physical confinement radically alters her relationship with her own anatomy.
Because she can't go anywhere else.
Exactly.
Yeah.
She couldn't walk out into the world to paint landscapes or observe daily life. She was trapped in this highly medicalized environment, just constantly surrounded by doctors, corsets, surgical interventions.
Right.
So she painted the only subject available, the subject she was studying intimately every single hour of the day, which was herself. That single accident set the stage for 35 major surgeries over the next 29 years.
35 surgeries. I mean, it is difficult to even comprehend that level of chronic compounding medical
It
intervention.
really is.
So how exactly does she translate that highly documented sterile medical reality onto a canvas? I want to look at the file on a painting from 1932 titled Henry Ford Hospital.
Oh, yes. This is a crucial one.
She paints this one after suffering a traumatic miscarriage in Detroit. Her husband, Diego Rivera, was commissioned to paint murals at the Ford Motor Company at the time.
Right. And she finds herself in this cold, unfamiliar hospital. She's isolated. She doesn't speak the language very well, and she is losing a pregnancy. And she immediately processes the experience by painting it.
Mhm.
If we evaluate Henry Ford Hospital through the lens of a clinical chart, the visual grammar she employs is incredibly precise and, frankly, detached.
It's very clinical.
Very. She places herself bleeding on an oversized hospital bed, but the bed isn't in a room. It is stranded in this vast, empty red landscape with the industrial steel factories of Detroit just looming indifferently in the background.
And emanating from her stomach are these 6 red threads. They look exactly like veins or umbilical cords.
Right.
And they attach her body to 6 objects floating in the space around the bed. This is where the medical reporting just becomes undeniable, right?
Absolutely.
Mm.
Because every single object tethered to her is a documented medical or environmental fact of that specific hospital stay.
Right,
There is a meticulously detailed fetus.
right.
There is a clinically accurate pink anatomical model of a pelvis. There is a heavy mechanical device used in orthopedic surgery, which obviously references her ongoing skeletal issues. There is an orchid, which Rivera had actually brought to her hospital room. There's a clinical rendering of a legless torso. And finally, hovering near the top, a snail.
Okay, so the snail. A snail feels like a jarring inclusion in a clinical inventory. Like it feels like we are slipping back into surrealist dream logic there.
It does feel like that at first glance.
But she explicitly documented later that the snail represented the literal, agonizingly slow speed of the miscarriage.
Yes.
It wasn't a dream symbol. It was a clinical observation of time. Like when you are hemorrhaging in a hospital bed, the perception of time slowing down is a very real, very terrifying symptom of the trauma.
It is a symptom, exactly.
She is charting the temporal distortion of a medical emergency.
And this specific method of visual documentation is why the modern medical community has actually validated this interpretation of her work.
Wait, really? The medical community uses her paintings.
They do. In 2004, Dr. Desmond O'Neill published this fascinating analysis in the British Medical Journal. He highlighted that medical educators actively use Kahlo's paintings to teach medical students what the subjective internal experience of chronic pain actually is.
Wow. I guess because clinical language falls so short, like asking a patient to rate their pain on a scale of 1 to 10, or writing patient reports severe discomfort in a chart, it entirely fails to capture the architecture of suffering. It just flattens the reality.
That's exactly it. The 1 to 10 scale is two-dimensional. Kahlo's paintings give pain a three-dimensional geography.
I love that.
Yeah, and André Breton, the famous French poet, he aggressively tried to claim her as a surrealist. He wanted to brand her work as manifestations of the subconscious.
And she hated that, right?
She completely rejected the label. Her response was absolutely definitive. She said, "I never painted dreams. I painted my own reality." She's telling the viewer, and perhaps her doctors, that she is not dealing in metaphor. She is providing an architectural blueprint of a failing body.
And you see that blueprint clearest in the broken column, which she painted in 1944.
Yes, definitely.
This follows a major spinal surgery that completely failed to provide the relief her surgeons had promised her. So she paints herself standing in a desolate, fractured landscape. Her torso is literally split wide open down the middle.
It's a striking image.
And inside her chest cavity, where a human spine should be, is a crumbling, fractured ionic column.
And she is wearing a rigid steel and medical fabric corset in the painting, which is a completely accurate, photorealistic depiction of the actual orthopedic corsets she had to wear daily.
They still have those at her museum, right?
Yes, many of them are preserved there. And in the painting, the corset is the only thing keeping her split body from falling apart. And pierced into her skin, scattered across her face, torso, and legs are exactly 57 nails.
It is such a specific number, 57. Like she is mapping the exact volume, location, and sharpness of the nerve pain radiating through her body. The larger nails represent localized, severe surgical pain, while the smaller nails covering her skin represent that constant, vibrating hum of chronic nerve damage.
It is a devastatingly effective medical diagram. She is visualizing the sensation of structural collapse. I mean, the ionic column, which is an architectural symbol of strength and support, it's cracked in multiple places, directly mirroring the multiple fractures from the bus crash and the failed fusions.
Okay, but I do have to push back gently on the pure, detached autopsy report framing here just for a second.
Okay, what do you mean?
If you zoom in really closely on the broken column, there is a tiny, brilliantly executed detail. Painted directly inside the pupils of Kahlo's eyes are these tiny, delicate white doves.
Ah, right, the dove.
And a clinical sterile autopsy report doesn't hide peace inside an inventory of suffering. That feels distinctly like a message to the viewer, like a psychological counter-narrative, rather than just a medical chart.
That's a fair pushback. And it really gets to the heart of what makes these paintings so complex. It questions the limits of standard medical documentation. Because, you're right, doves do not appear on x-rays. Blood panels do not measure hope.
Right.
But recall her foundational premise. She painted herself because she was alone, and she was the subject she knew best. She knew the mechanical hardware of her body was disintegrating, but she was equally aware that her consciousness was refusing to surrender.
Yeah.
So the doves serve as a vital sign of her psychological survival, embedded right inside the record of her physical destruction.
She is basically insisting that the clinical record is incomplete if it only documents the damage. The resilience is part of the diagnosis.
Exactly.
So if physical pain is recorded with this level of architectural precision, how does a medical painter record systemic emotional collapse? Like, where does the chart go when the pain isn't originating from a broken bone?
Well, we find that answer in 1945 with a profoundly disturbing painting called Without Hope.
Oh, this one is tough to look at.
It is. Kahlo was bedridden yet again following another failed vertebral fusion. The chronic pain was so severe and her depression so deep that she lost a dangerous amount of weight.
Yeah.
Her physician stepped in and ordered her to be aggressively force-fed just to keep her organs from shutting down.
And she paints the procedure exactly as she experiences it. The canvas shows a skeletal, emaciated version of herself lying in bed. Hovering above her is this grim wooden scaffold holding a massive funnel.
Right.
And the funnel is stuffed into her mouth, and overflowing from it is this grotesque, overwhelming pile of food. There are whole chickens, sausages, fish, and Mexican candy skulls.
It's incredibly visceral. It communicates a total violation of bodily autonomy, which, by the way, is a very real trauma experienced by many chronic patients who are subjected to relentless, invasive medical procedures.
Absolutely. The loss of autonomy is the central pathology of the painting, and she physically flipped the canvas over and wrote her diagnosis on the back. Not the least hope remains to me. She logged the despair on the reverse, and she painted the brutal clinical intervention on the front. Yet, even in a piece explicitly titled Without Hope, she paints a tiny background window. And shining through that window, defying the absolute bleakness of the room, are two bright suns.
The vital signs of hope, again, refusing to flatline completely.
Which brings us to perhaps her most famous examination of emotional trauma, The Two Fridas, painted in 1939.
Such a massive, iconic canvas.
It really is. And it was created right in the middle of her agonizing, highly public divorce from Diego Rivera. It presents two distinct life-size versions of herself sitting side by side on a bench against this stormy, turbulent sky.
Right. On one side sits the European Frida, dressed in a high-necked, white Victorian lace dress. Her chest is cut open, exposing her heart. She is holding surgical scissors, clamping a severed artery, and bright red blood is aggressively dripping down the pristine white fabric of her skirt. And beside her sits the Mexican Frida, wearing the traditional, vibrant Tijuana dress Rivera loved so much. Her heart is whole, resting securely on her chest, and a single vein connects the two hearts, keeping the bleeding European Frida alive.
There is a quote widely attributed to her from this period. The historical documentation of the exact phrasing is a little imprecise, but the sentiment is universally recognized as the core of her survival mechanism.
Oh, the drowning sorrows quote.
Yes, she supposedly said, "I tried to drown my sorrows, but the bastards learned how to swim."
It perfectly encapsulates how relentless she found the psychological pain. It was a pathogen she just couldn't eradicate, no matter the treatment.
Well, Kahlo famously referred to her lifelong painting practice as her second accident, the first obviously being the streetcar collision.
Right.
So looking at the two Fridas, she is using the exact same visual vocabulary of exposed internal organs, surgical clamps, severed arteries, and literal bleeding to depict the end of a marriage. Does this imply she genuinely viewed emotional grief and relational severance as a literal physical injury to her biology?
The visual evidence heavily suggests that she did. And this challenges us to radically expand our definition of what constitutes a medical record.
Yeah.
For Kahlo, grief was not an abstract poetic concept.
It was physical.
It was a visible hemorrhaging wound. By utilizing the exact same surgical imagery to depict a divorce that she used to depict a spinal fusion, she is making a profound neurobiological argument long before modern science confirmed it.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the human nervous system does not neatly differentiate between the trauma of a shattered pelvis and the trauma of a shattered attachment. It all registers as severe systemic damage.
That makes so much sense. She didn't use a different color palette for physical agony versus emotional agony. Pain is pain. The body absorbs the shockwave of a divorce the exact same way it absorbs the shockwave of a streetcar.
Precisely. Which leads us to the ultimate, inevitable conclusion of these visual medical records. What happens to the documentation when the physical body ultimately finally ceases to function?
The final entries are, well, they're brutal. Less than a year before her death, at the age of 47 in 1954, the medical interventions basically ran out of efficacy. Her right leg, the same leg withered by childhood polio, the same leg shattered into 11 pieces in the 1925 crash, it developed severe gangrene.
Yeah.
And her surgeons were forced to amputate it below the knee just to save her life.
And remember, she had spent her entire adult life carefully concealing that leg under those magnificent skirts, rigorously masking the physical reality of her disability. Now the limb was entirely gone.
Right.
Following the amputation, she wrote a deeply ambiguous entry in her diary. She wrote, "They have amputated my leg. I have been given wings."
It is a devastatingly complex statement. Like, is it ultimate defiance? Is she declaring that her spirit is finally untethered from this decaying, painful appendage that has dragged her down for 4 decades?
Or is it something else?
Yeah, or is it the quiet, resigned sound of a patient who has finally decided they are finished fighting the infection?
And the ambiguity surrounding her state of mind extends directly to her death just months later. The official documented cause of death was recorded as a pulmonary embolism. But historians and biographers have long noted circumstantial signs pointing toward a possible intentional overdose.
Because of her diary, right.
Exactly. Her final diary entry heavily implies an intentional departure. She wrote, "I hope the exit is joyful and I hope never to return."
But the true final prognosis, the absolute last record she leaves us, isn't actually found in the diary. It is a painting she finished roughly 8 months before her death, titled Viva la Vida.
Yes. And what makes this painting so extraordinary is everything it deliberately excludes.
It's so different from the rest.
It really is. It is not a self-portrait. There are no exposed bleeding hearts. There are no floating fetuses or anatomical pelvis models. There are no rigid steel corsets holding a spine together, and there are absolutely no nails.
None. It is a brilliantly simple, incredibly vibrant, sunlit still life of freshly cut watermelon resting on the earth. Bright red flesh, stark black seeds, thick green rind. And carved directly into the flesh of the central melon in bold lettering are the words, Viva la vida, long live life.
Just consider the grueling trajectory of the medical files we just reviewed over the last 29 years. 35 major surgeries, traumatic miscarriages, unsuccessful spinal fusions, forced feeding funnels, chronic nerve damage, and finally, a gangrenous amputation.
It's a lot, and for you listening, just sit with what it requires of a human being to endure a lifetime of that specific, inescapable level of chronic agony, to meticulously document every brutal, unvarnished second of it, and still choose to leave long live life as your final chart note.
It is breathtaking.
It is the patient discharging herself on her own terms.
It stands as the ultimate act of defiance against the decay of the body. The British Medical Journal analysis concluded that her work's immense value lies in making the subjective experience of chronic pain visible to physicians. But in her final act, she made her refusal to be entirely defined by that pain just as visible.
Which is exactly why the clinical reading of her art and the emotional, artistic reading are not in competition at all. They are describing the exact same reality from different vantage points.
Right.
The deeper you understand the brutal medical reality of her failing anatomy, the deeper you understand the staggering psychological triumph of those doves painted in the eyes of the broken column.
The biology and the art are completely inseparable here. She stated she painted herself because she was alone and she was the subject she knew best. She didn't set out to create a curriculum for medical empathy,
No, of course not.
but by painting exactly what she survived, with unblinking forensic honesty, she accidentally created the most complete, most defiant first-person record of chronic physical suffering in the history of Western art.
And that brings us to the end of our deep dive today. But before you take out your headphones, I want you to consider a final thought that builds on everything we've unpacked here. We've spent this time analyzing how Kahlo painted to make her invisible pain visible to herself. But go back to the inciting incident. Go back to that mirror her mother installed above her bed right after the crash. The mirror that forced her to look at her own
The
brokenness.
start of it all.
Exactly. When you look at Frida Kahlo's self-portraits today, you aren't just looking at her medical chart. You, the viewer, are standing in the exact physical location of that ceiling mirror. She painted these striking, impossible-to-ignore images to force the outside world to act as her mirror.
Wow.
She was demanding that the world reflect her pain back outward so she wouldn't have to carry the crushing weight of that knowledge entirely alone.
That's incredibly powerful.
So as you go through your week, ask yourself, who in your life is silently asking you to be their mirror? Who is desperately trying to show you the invisible, chronic pain they can't quite put into clinical words, hoping you are brave enough not to look away?
Well said.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.